Picture the scene. It's 1972, and Bobby Fischer is currently the best chess player in the world. But he's not world champion. In fact, the world championship is happening right now. This is game 6. Fischer actually lost the first 2 games and then went on a big comeback spree. The game is now level at 2.5 each. Fischer picking up some impressive victories recently, and if he goes on to win this game, it's going to be a huge turning point in the match and a very important game for sure. So Fischer, with the white pieces, chooses to basically out-prepare Spassky because he knew Spassky wasn't famous for his memory. He knows his second, F.M. Geller, would have recommended him a line against this exact variation, but he was almost banking on the fact Spassky had forgotten and the fact that he would actually be able to outplay him in the resulting position because he knew he was the better chess player. He had no doubt in his mind. He goes c4, Spassky responds with e6, go knight to f3, simply developing, and then d5. This is the Agincourt defense. It's known as this because it's the French defense, this setup of e6 and d5, normally against e4, but against c4 the English. The French defending against the English, much like the Battle of Agincourt, the real military battle that happened in France. So d4, completely forget about the English opening. This is now a Queen's Gambit declined, normally reach from a different move order. Queen's Gambit declined to normally go something like this, but we just simply transpose into it a few moves later like this. So a little bit of tip for you there. Fischer decides to put a bit of pressure on the board by getting his knight attacking the center, not really threatening to exchange. Very standard move. This has all been played before. Tickles that knight on f6. Spassky just decides to castle. See, e3, h6. Fischer doesn't decide to capture a knight. He wants to keep his bishop on the board and maintain its pressure on the knight here. Spassky just goes for b6 because that light square bishop is not getting into the game through this diagonal. It's going to have to get it out to the other diagonal. So we see captures. The game is completely even now. Fischer has to find a way to prove an advantage now because, of course, he has to win. A lot of pieces are coming off the board, but we can see Fischer's plan come to fruition after capturing. He has the open c-file and he wastes no time. He immediately brings the rook to that c-file. Spassky is forced to respond. How do you defend this pawn? Obviously, the queen's defending it as well. Once white starts ganging up on that queen side, things are going to get a little bit dicey for Spassky. He's even got this hook on b6, so he could maybe even let it be targeted with an advance like a4, a5. And even most annoyingly, you can't now develop your knight to its most natural square because, of course, that would simply be captured. Of course, this is before engines were invented. If you had preparation, you had to just memorize it by yourself from books or from seconds, and no one was really sure what was the best move. So Spassky here continues with bishop to e6. Actually, in fact, this is the best move according to the computer. I know it's seen as a bit of a chess crime to analyze all these old games with the computer because, of course, they were not around when they were played. That's why I don't have the eval bar on for this video because there was no eval bar in 1972. Now here, Fischer doesn't continue naturally with a move like getting the bishop out, trying to castle. No, instead he gets his queen out. He swings his queen out to this a4 square, which looks like a very obscure move, but it has a concrete idea. The idea is that after Spassky decides to lash out in the center, which Fischer knew he would do, he actually plays this very funky looking move, queen to a3. So, I mean, when Fischer plays like this, everyone's like, oh wow, what a genius. Well, this was known variation. Fischer didn't come up with this himself, but if an average 1200 brings their queen out and moves it again on move 13 of the game, it's probably not going to be a very good move, but Fischer knew what he was doing. He's putting very concrete pressure on the c-pawn, threatening to take, and the black takes back, just simply to win that pawn with the rook or the queen. So Spassky has a choice here how to defend. And one awkward move, we see another awkward move, rook to c8. Not a move you really want to play. Sometimes a very concrete positional advantage you can have, especially in like books and stuff, they'll say things like, oh, leave your opponent's rooks tripping over each other. And that's what we see in this game. Normally you want to have your rooks in the center of the board. Of course, this game is getting played on the queen side, but these two rooks, they can't cross over each other. They're going to be very slow, lumbering towards the side of the board that the play eventually happens to fall upon. Of course, it's well placed now, but that rook on an a8 is languishing in the corner. Bishop to b5, continuing with the preparation, basically preparing to be snap that knight and continue that harsh pressure on that c5 pawn. See a6 by Spassky. Bit of a nothing move in my opinion. I mean, Spassky, a much better chess player than I, but you can't actually take that bishop. It simply cannot be captured. If you capture the bishop, you would lose that rook. It's currently pinned, so not really sure why a6 is played here. I'm not an expert in the Queen's Gambit, but it doesn't actually do that much, at least right now. Fischer decides to capture, Spassky recaptures, and now Fischer's plan comes to fruition. These two pawns are now isolated. These are sort of hanging pawns in this structure. This isn't exactly the hanging pawn structure, but these two pawns are on a bit of an island. And Fischer's going to put pressure on them basically forever. He decides to castle, very natural. Rook to a7 now from Spassky. Finally, this actually makes sure the queen defends the rook, so now he actually is threatening to capture that bishop. Fischer goes, no worries, bishop to e2. And we can see Fischer now will continue with his plan. Spassky develops a knight. Knight to d4, utilizing another pin. Of course, you can't capture this knight because that would be very unfortunate to lose your rook on the back rank because nothing actually defends it. So, of course, that did not happen in the game. That is not how Spassky lost the game. No, he played queen to f8, didn't capture a knight. This looks like a weird retreating move, but grandmasters often do this sort of thing, basically saying the queen is actually quite well placed on this f8 square. It still influences the same control it did. Now it's just less vulnerable to attacks and threats, like maybe the knight coming into c6, of course, not soon, but queen is now on a bit of a safer square, basically. So knight takes e6. Fischer grabs that bishop. He loved his bishops, Bobby Fischer, and now he's just going to try and use the weakening of the structure to generate himself some sort of advantage. So these pawns in the center are a bit less isolated, don't you think? Is that what you're on about? But now Fischer actually has the advantage of bishop versus knight, so all endgames might be a little bit better for him, especially when the board is slightly open. And Fischer's going to go about opening the board to make sure his bishop is better than knight. That is the imbalance that he is working towards. And also, Spassky's king is a little bit weak after that f-pawn moved from its normal standard post. So e4, as I said, Fischer immediately capitalizing on that advantage, trying to split Spassky's pawns and open up the board so his bishop can dominate this sad knight on d7. d4, Spassky doesn't decide to split his pawns. It's actually a worse move. According to the engine, you actually should capture here, and there's quite a long line. Basically, white will just go like rook c4 and eventually bring the queen over and try and win this pawn, or at least get some very dynamic counterplay after these pawns have been split, because of course, damage to the structure is very, very important at this level of the game. Fischer continues with a natural plan. He goes f4, lurching forwards into the position, maybe even starting some sort of kingside attack. But this move also decides to take some space and really dominates this knight as well, because again, that is the imbalance. Now the knight cannot hop to that very useful e5 square. Queen to e7 by Spassky. He doesn't really show it to you. He can't go with this normal move, knight to e5, so it's unclear. Now it's sort of justifying, like, why did he actually move his queen back to f8? I guess he's getting off the line of this rook, so that makes a little bit of sense, but still, because Spassky's starting to flounder, and Fischer's very small advantage now becoming even bigger and even more realized move by move. e5 by Fischer, completely controlling all these squares around here, maintaining a bit of an iron grip in the center of the board. Spassky has these two passed pawns, but he simply can't push them yet. His pieces are all a bit uncoordinated, his setup looks artificial, and Fischer is wasting no time. Spassky goes rook to b8, putting a bit of pressure on this pawn, but it's already defended. But in fact, this was actually an almost decisive mistake. Hold on guys, just one quick announcement. Just want to say very, very few people watching our videos are actually subscribed. I know you might have seen this graph a lot, but I am very close to 1,000 subscribers. That would mean a lot to me. So if you are enjoying the content you see, please subscribe to the channel, and let's get back to the video. It's very hard to see why, but the reason why is because what Fischer played in the game, bishop to c4. This move is so powerful you should not allow it at all costs. A better move would have been something like knight to b6 here, controlling that c4 square and just making sure that bishop doesn't become an absolute monster on that c4 square, but he doesn't allow that. He goes rook to b8, allowing bishop to c4, and now Spassky is in big trouble. He's not even sure what he should do. Of course, that e6 pawn is not liable to be captured yet, but after Fischer swings that queen over, Spassky's going to be in a world of hurt. He decides to go king to h8, just making sure that if that pawn gets captured, it's not check, and making sure that pawn is not pinned to take the sting out of ideas like f5, but Fischer doesn't seem to care. He goes queen to h3, threatening to win the pawn, and knight to f8 is forced out of Spassky. Not only if you want to play retreating your minor piece, micro battle in the game of chess, making sure your minor piece is better than your opponent's minor pieces. We can almost see every single one of Fischer's pieces is better than Spassky's. This bishop is better than the passive knight, because obviously you think, oh, the knight's defending and the bishop's attacking. Well, the bishop is actually attacking two things at once, limiting the activity of this rook. These rooks aren't very well coordinated, and Fischer's rooks are influencing power on each side of the board. So this just goes to show the power Fischer had in his day and what a player he was. b3, just anchoring in that bishop, maybe creating a little bit of a hook for Spassky to attack, but he's not going to have time with all this kingside shenanigans going on. So a5, yes, as I said, he is going to try and use that hook, but then f5 comes. You think, wait, why would Fischer want to trade off this very weak pawn at e6? What is the idea there? Well, the idea is to, again, open up lines for that bishop and queen to just dominate and control that black king. So you see, after Spassky captures, the rook swings into the game. He's got ideas of doubling the rooks, being very uncomfortable for Spassky. After knight to h7, just trying to defend all these key squares, may rotate a knight to f6 to stop the bleeding if the pawn comes in. Fischer goes with his plan. He goes rook c to f1, doubling on that f-file. Now things are getting very scary for Spassky. It's hard to see a concrete win, but Spassky has no counterplay here. He's shuffling his pieces back and forth for the rest of the game. These passed pawns are going absolutely nowhere. His king is weak. This knight is somewhat misplaced. So queen to d8 by Spassky. Fischer advances his pawn. Oh no. Fischer places his queen in a bit of a better square. Rook to e7 comes, and now h4 by Fischer. Not the best move, but it's almost like a Magnus style move, which is funny to say because they did have a bit of a similar style, Fischer and Magnus. The idea of this move is to stop that knight going to any pesky square like g5, and also maybe even punch that pawn into h5 to control the square to build some sort of mating net in the future. So Fischer's got all the time in the world, so he wants to improve his position to the maximum before trying to force anything through. Spassky just moves his rook. Honestly, he doesn't really have much to do here. He can't advance these pawns, could simply be captured, so it's hard for him to even find a move at any moment. e6, finally advancing in the position. The rook swings over, and now Fischer just places his queen on an absolutely lovely square. Of course, the rook was going to defend that pawn that was attacked, and also the pawn moves forward defended by the bishop. So Fischer swings his queen into e5, not threatening to capture on c5, no. This is just an absolutely lovely square for the queen to begin things like rook to f7 or other things like that. So as we can see, Spassky, literally, the engine agrees with this. The best thing black can do is shuffle this queen back and forth on the back rank. There's simply nothing to do. Spassky is almost in Zugzwang because moving any of these pieces could be catastrophic to his position. So we see a4 by Fischer, stopping any counterplay with a5 with the queen being placed on that d8 square. On the e8 square, sorry. The queen now moves to d8, and now we see Fischer just moves the rook, almost saying to Spassky, you literally have nothing to do here. I'm just going to move my rook back and forth. I'm not sure if there was time control needing to be reached, but we do see a tiny bit of shuffling. Fischer improving his pieces to the absolute maximum. And he decides to go bishop d3, threatening to maybe trade off this knight or replacing the bishop to a slightly better square. Nothing really doing there. Again, queen to e8. Spassky just forced to shuffle his pieces back and forth. Queen goes now to e4. We see the battery has been formed with the bishop, threatening to take that knight with checkmate if the rook was ever to move. So even an idea like rook to f8, and then taking that knight is threatened. Spassky has to defend. He has to go knight to f6 to stop that threat. But then Fischer gives a brilliant move here. He sacrifices the rook. And after g takes, he's got a nice move. Rook takes f6, recapturing that pawn. Then his king is simply just going to be too weak. Even though it looks like he's well protected with the rooks and the queen, they're slightly too far away from the king, and the rooks can't help because the bishop is coming in as well. Spassky decides to move his king. We see bishop to c4 by Fischer, supporting that pawn, and now building a sort of mating net around that white king. So the black king, sorry. The rooks cannot move, and the pieces are going to swing in with checkmate. King to h8 by Spassky. King to h8 by Spassky. After queen to f4, Spassky resigned the game. There's really nothing black can do here. You can't defend this pawn with anything really. If you want to go play a move like rook to h7, defending that pawn, you're going to run into rook f8 check. If the queen recaptures, you can recapture that with the queen with checkmate. So you can't stop mate that way. With the engine, since it's mate in 7, the best move for black here is with queen to g8. Then you've got rook to f8, just pinning that queen and winning it. You can go rook to c8, it's probably the best move. Then queen h6 check, rook to h7, rook takes g8 check, king takes g8, e7 check with the bishop, of course the discovery, rook to f7, and then you queen with checkmate. Beautiful, showing activity of Fischer's pieces. 2 queens versus 2 rooks, and the bishop, the minor piece, still playing a role in the game. So an absolutely beautifully played game by Fischer, showing that even these sort of dry-looking d4 positions where you have this Queen's Gambit declined, even in a very well-known line, like all this has been played before, even up to around this point, all this has been seen before. I think this was Geller's analysis himself, and Fischer knew Spassky wouldn't know what to do here, took the game into uncharted territory around here, and then just mounted pressure on these queenside pawns, and then eventually, after Spassky had sort of contorted himself so much to control these, then started a large kingside attack. Again, absolutely beautiful stuff by Fischer. And then he went on to, after winning this game, went on to win the 1972 World Championship. And from there, the rest is history. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.